Now, I think the intention is to have a question and answer session. How long did that take?
We weren't watching the time.
Oh, I see. Well, thanks very much, Cherusha. So we've got time if anybody wants to make any comments, who disagrees violently or even trivially with what was said, or would like to ask any questions.
Just an innocent question. I'm not technical in any way, shape, or form. But in your costings, say in South Africa, you do is there a type of a carbon refund element in those costings?
No, it's just mano a mano, out in street fighting, coal or wind, and wind wins every time. It's dramatic. We've got bigger blades now. We've got higher turbines. Competition works in our space. We've got loads of producers of wind turbines. In fact, there were 80 producers of wind turbines in China, but we've got the world leaders in General Electric, Siemens, Vestas, and about 6 or 7 other producers as well. So there's been healthy competition there, and just scale matters. If you manage to get a lot of things done, well then you'll see the price start decreasing. And I'm quoting a Deloitte report, which I was delighted to see because I hadn't realised myself that the price had fallen quite so much. I thought we were the exception in South Africa, but actually when I read that report, this is the global world digression in price. Anybody else? Any comments?
Question about aviation. China, I'm not sure I need one. China is, its aviation sector is about to grow rapidly. They've released the airspace up to 15,000 feet. So civil aviation, commercial aviation, freight aviation is going to explode, to grow, sorry.
Well, that's the same thing. Yeah.
And of course, but hopefully the planes won't explode. So the emissions from planes at the moment is quite carbon deteriorated, very bad carbon emissions. So the only solution is probably electric planes or renewable energy planes in some fashion. What's your comment about that?
Well, I would say yes. About 2% of global emissions, according to Michael O'Leary, comes from airplanes. I give you that figure because that's what he said. I haven't done any of the calculations myself, but it's probably in that order. And that's a lot of carbon dioxide, actually. So the solution for that, I don't believe it's going to be possible to do electric planes. There's a lot of experiments in this now. They have covered planes' wings with PV, but really, you just require a huge, big collection area to make that in any way effective. And if you try and do it with batteries, well, even with lithium-ion batteries, you still have just too great a weight. So I believe that what you're going to see with planes is biofuels. I think it's the one area that we can't actually immediately turn to wind and earth-based solar to do. So we're going to have to grow some crops like biodiesel, bioethanol, whatever, and then use chemical process to turn those into kerosene, which is in fact the aviation fuel. So it's an important variable, and I don't believe that the aviation industry will be the exception that proves the rule here. I think I see lots of experimentation going on at the moment with Boeing, with Airbus, with Virgin, for instance, Virgin Atlantic have been trying things out. New aircraft engines are being designed all the time. So I think we're going to see that be like any other industry. The biggest challenge is with cement, because in the very process of making cement, you take limestone out of the ground, you drive off the CO2, and you provide the heat with the dirtiest form of fossil fuels that you can find, like old tyres, like stuff that's redolent with sulphur. So much sulphur in it, but sulphur actually adds up to making good cement. So cement is a filthy industry, absolutely.
But on that actually, there's an Irish company called Ecosem.
Yeah.
Who produce cement from slag.
They do, and that's quite an acceptable alternative. Yeah, I used to be a sinner in the old days. I used to work in Moneypoint, a coal-fired power station, and we used to sell some of the ash, the fly ash from burning coal. We used to sell that to cement companies, and you could be able to make. They used to say you could mix it in up to 5%, but in fact, they're going now towards 20%. But in fact, we're building a wind plant in South Africa now at Laurice Fontaine, and we have two bases for our turbines which have no cement in them, which is unbelievable. But as a chemical engineer, I tend to believe that type of stuff. That you can, if you understand what the underlying chemistry is, you can do it without that central key ingredient.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor, for your interesting presentation. And in a general comment, I would say you were absolutely right in pointing out that things are getting real in China in addressing environmental issues and climate change. The national leadership takes this very, very seriously, and we are hopeful that we will see more progress in the coming years. You touched upon solar energy and wind energy. I myself have read some reports in the past few months, and I'm aware of the progress that China, the efforts and progress that China is making. But could you also say a few words about hydropower? Do you see a future there?
Yeah, hydro is a tremendous source if you're able to do it. Now, China has 320,000 megawatts. It's absolutely enormous hydro resource already, and I think it's the Yangtze where the Great Three Rivers dam is, and that's the problem with hydro in the world is that you have to flood great areas usually, and then you have to do your environmental impact assessment on that. And planning consents are difficult to achieve in this area. I don't know what the Pearl River or the Yellow River, what the capabilities are in China for further exploitation. I think there's some there, but I don't think that there's an awful lot. I think there are places in the world where hydro, for instance in Ethiopia, where we're based as well. They're building a Millennium Dam with 6,000 megawatts. They're actually damming the Blue Nile, and that supplies 85% of the water into the Great Nile system, which I think is the longest river in the world. The Yangtze is the third longest, and the Yellow River is the fifth longest. So you can get it if you have those big rivers. In a place like Ireland, I mean, it's going to be tiny amounts of little streams that are dammed up, and that's run-of-river stuff, but that'll make no contribution in terms of global warming. What's interesting about this is that in South Africa, a report is about to be published by the Research Institute there, which shows that 85% of the country can be covered in wind turbines. Now, and this is just leaving out all the... I can see our folk in the Midlands really loving this one. That it could supply the whole of Africa with energy from there. So we don't, and it's much cheaper than hydro. Hydro actually is very expensive. The civil works that are involved there are enormous. You have to build these huge big dams, loads of new roads. You have to flood all these areas. You have to move a lot of people usually, and so that everything costs an awful lot. Wind and solar are right now so competitive, and will remain so because of competition. Every new country that comes to build wind or solar plant in Africa, in Latin America and elsewhere, they call in the consultants, Ernst & Young or PwC, and they say, how do we run a competition? And it's all competitions now. So therefore they always get the cheapest. So yeah, but it's good. I mean, if we had more water in the world, water is really troublesome. There's a lot of water in the world now that is drying up with global warming. So you could make a very big investment and find out then that the river systems weren't yielding what they thought. There's huge drought going on, for instance, in large parts of the United States, up in the Columbia River system and throughout Oregon and Washington State. They've been in a drought, and California. In fact, throughout an awful lot of the United States, global warming is there, just as it is in China, but it's more dramatic in China because of the incredible fertility. Can you imagine the people who migrated out of Africa, the Han people who came up to China? and they had to cross. They all had to cross that isthmus there, which is now the Suez Canal, get up into Asia Minor. Some headed down to Persia and formed the Persian civilization, and others, for some reason, headed up into Afghanistan. And there they had to cross the Hindu Kush mountains, which gave Alexander the Great an awful lot of trouble, but the Han people did so. And then they would have crossed the Kunlun Mountains as well. And possibly then they found the Yangtze and the Yellow River, which rise there. And maybe were able to sail down to the eastern plains. But once they got to eastern China, this was an incredibly fertile place. And as you know yourself, animal proteins aren't consumed very much. They're not needed. Very, very healthy people in China as a result of eating mainly vegetable proteins and that. And that was what gave rise to this explosion in population. China always had an enormous population relative to what the rest of the world. And of course there were no enemies. That's the point I made in the speech. There was no marauding tribes. Now it all came later on, but the culture was well established in China. The Analects of Confucius were written in 2,000 years ago. There's another thing about China which I find very interesting. We had an employee there called Wang Jun in China. He was married to, he said she was a princess. I don't know what that means, but she could trace her lineage 111 generations back to Kongzi, to the great Confucius. I mean, how does this happen? 111 generations back. And so it's extraordinary stuff, really, that you can have a civilization that's based on and I have to, thank Jerusha McCormick and John Blair, who are here for their great work thinking through China, which explained the wonderful construct, the principal construct, which seems to me to be Mianzi, which gives rise to so much of the culture of China. And that's a great book, by the way. I don't get any profits from this book sales, but I can recommend that book to anybody who wants to try and understand what this culture does. Because, culture, we're all human beings. We're all very much the same. But it's the culture that differentiates. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. This may sound like a political question, but it's actually an economic one. It's the question of the balance of funding assets and funding the generation of green power. And at the same time, it's a national asset in many countries. And at the same time, you need to build efficiencies in your enterprise in order to be able to fund and continue to fund. Do you have a general comment around that?
Well,
and I should say that I'm in favour of green energy. I'm not one of the ones from the Midlands.
Well, we have to engage in this debate with anybody. What's the best way to face this? If we're looking forward where to start? Most of the power stations in the Western world right now are 30 to 50 years old. Now, it's an engineering fact that when you use fossil fuels and you heat metals up to 500 degrees centigrade or maybe 600, and you have huge pressures up to 100 atmospheres, that an engineering phenomenon called creep happens. So you can't just refurbish old power stations, old thermal power stations. They have to be torn down and the steel has to be melted and recycled. So we are going to have to build in the West 1 million megawatts in America, probably 1.5 million in Europe, and proportionately in Russia and China and all the other countries. Then that, if you like, form the developed world. So they're going to have to replace all that plant over the next 20 years. Our Money Point's going to be one day turned down. The 3 power stations in the Midlands, burning peat, they're all going to disappear. So our choice is, what do we put in their place? So it's essentially a planning exercise that we have to start thinking about. I've heard people say that that renewables have to reach grid parity. Well, this is a meaningless concept because these power stations were built 40 years ago. They're now paid down fully, depreciated fully after 20 years. The coal mines that supply them are fully depreciated as well, so you're operating on the marginal cost of coal. So you've no capital cost, and it's the marginal cost of coal. So you can't compare new build wind with old coal, right? So therefore we have a choice to make as a globe, and every country has to make this choice. What are we going to build to take us out to 2050? And we have to make this choice over the next 10 to 20 years. So that's the context, that's the real context we're looking at the question that you ask. It's not as if we're going to build an awful lot more wind and on top of what we have already. All these power stations will fade away and they'll be closed. And in our lifetime, as Irish people, having worked 17 years in the ESB, the place I worked in originally was Pigeon House, and then I went to work in Ringsend, and then I went to work in Bellacorrick, and then I think about 7 or 8 of the old power stations are closed, and that's what's happening on a global basis. They have to be closed because they begin to get all these micro cracks. So, so now that we're competitive with coal without any carbon charges, I want to make this point. Somebody else asked me about it. Are we including what we get from the government for mitigating carbon emissions? Well, we get nothing from the South African government. We get nothing from the Chilean government. Well, maybe we might get a bit there, but not much. We will get nothing in Ethiopia, and we get nothing in Kenya. Now, you will in some countries get some stuff still because of the risks of investing in that particular country. But in if you like, a stable Western democracy, we can compete. We can compete with gas turbine plant down to a price of probably now $5 per million BTUs. It used to be up around 7 or 8. Now it's down at 5 because of the price digression in our case. So the future is very bright for the industry, but the power of BP, the power of Shell, the power of Texaco, Chevron, and the Koch brothers spending, they're in billions out of coal. So you just talk to your local congressman, or better still, send them a check. Hope this isn't being recorded. Anyway, so any other questions? Yep.
You mentioned the Republicans.
I shouldn't have done that.
If they come back to power in the next elections, are you pessimistic?
You'd always have to be pessimistic about politics and politicians. You really would, because something like 50% of the American population, believes that global warming is happening. Well, that means 50% probably believe the propaganda put out that God will show the way. We're put on this here as the protected beings. This is what I find so objectionable, the concept of God, that it's not in our own hands. This is why I admire the Chinese culture so much, because they say everything's in our own hands. So, yes, I would be concerned. When you see Marco Rubio, for instance, who is the presentable 44-year-old, very acceptable, handsome young man, and he was all in Florida, which is the most threatened place in the United States if the sea levels begin to rise. He said, of course global warming is a big fact, but now he's running for president. No, that's all irrelevant. You put too many costs down the economy. And so you would be frightened by that stuff, yeah, but you guess it's everywhere. I've seen more changes in the developed world in terms of policy changes than I've seen in the third world. Britain changed its mind about wind energy and about solar. They reduced solar is still in Britain, in a country like Ireland, very dark place. Solar still needs to be subsidised. So they reduced the subsidies for solar by 85% and killed the whole industry just like that. And they did the same with onshore wind, and they did the same effectively with offshore wind. And we see, and this is quite, I see Mrs. Merkel in Germany. Mrs. Merkel has a view of the average snail for the future. There's absolutely no vision whatsoever there. There's no, where are we taking Germany now for the next 30 or 40 years? You saw what happened with her in nuclear. She's a nuclear physicist, by the way. And she was all in favour of it. And next thing, they start losing elections in North Rhine-Westphalia and a couple of other places. And suddenly she does away with the nuclear industry. That's just all response. And this is apropos of your question. It's a very important question. what about politics? That's why you love to see people like Xi Jinping, for instance, being at the helm in China. This is a man who came up he probably one of the cleverest men in China, and with the temperament to go with it, who emerged from in the local area, and then went to the province, and then got to the Central Council. Then was the most eminent on the Central Council. This man is equipped to run a country. There's nothing left to chance here. And my great friend Brendan Halligan, who collaborated with me profoundly on writing this speech, which I'm very grateful to Brendan for, and it's wonderful, pointed out that there's a university in Shanghai where the bureaucrats, the mandarins, if you like, go to every 5 years to be re-educated, to understand, what's new, how's it happening. That kind of meritocracy doesn't exist here, and it's a strange concept for us. And that's how politics in China is different from politics in the West. In that, you saw this guy, who was it? The fellow running for the Republicans. He's nearly out of the race now. He's a neurosurgeon. Yeah, and he's a Seventh-day Adventist. That's right. Yeah, Seventh-day Adventist. Oh, the world is coming to an end anyway. Global warming. What's this global warming? It's going to all end anyway. We have very, very interesting views on politicians, but I don't think I should be bothering you with it, because they're probably trivial in the grand scheme of things.
Can I ask one, certainly possibly the last question, and I'll raise my voice so I don't hit the mic. Is there any effect, and again, I'm never an engineer, is there any effect on the absorption of solar into solar energy that we know about, or we may not know about? And secondly, how do you respond to what we generally hear about you call them the Midlands grids, the light flickering and the noise? How do you, from a non-as technical point of view, how do you respond to both of those complaints from the Midlands?
Well, so the first question again. Sorry, just remind me now.
The absorption.
Yes, the absorption. No, I think we can discount that one straight away, for the following reason: that if you were to even take, I think 100 miles by 100 miles in the Sahara, that's enough to power the world, or so I'm told. So and that's tiny in terms of the instant energy on the Earth. So you have to capture a very small amount of that. So I think you can take it that all it would be doing would be heating up the sands, and they'd be cooling again at night. You just absorb that stuff. So I don't think there's any problem with that. On the subject of the NIMBYs, favourite subject of mine, I've heard everything at this stage. And I don't mind sharing a couple of these with you. And this could be our last. How are we doing time-wise? We're still all right. But, there was a wind farm planned for somewhere near Edinburgh. And I heard the local group, opposition group, came and they said it's going to release meteoric niobium into the groundwater of Edinburgh and kill 1 million people. I'm an engineer, a chemical engineer. Meteoric niobium was it a complete and total rubbish. Another one was there's a company in England, a big construction company. I'm trying to remember their name. They own RES, Renewable Energy Systems. Sir Robert McAlpine. And the NIMBYs came along and says, what used they build in the old days? You're right, nuclear. And where do you think they're going to put the nuclear waste when that's made from these nuclear power stations? Right, into the foundations of the turbines. It's good and heavy. It'll keep them weighed down to the ground. Just about anything that comes into your mind, you say, because you don't want them. Now, we have to be sympathetic to these. I mean, I joke about it, but the fact is we spend a lot of our life working with local communities, explain to them. In Chile even, we would recruit, we had a psychologist on our books, Alejandra, and she works with indigenous communities in the Atacama Desert. And these people were grievously exploited by the conquistadores who came in there. They were practically wiped out. They were hunted like animals. And we finish up picking up the pieces there But we do this task, and we treat it very seriously in that we go out and talk to them, we build cell masts for them, we explain to them that there'll be so much money flowing from this wind farm into their community in perpetuity. So, we have to deal with this, and we have to deal with all reasonable things. We have the same ideals as the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in the UK, for instance, who are opposing a big plant that we're proposing to build over there. But I think 750,000 puffins were wiped out in the Northern Isles of Scotland because the sand eel has gone away, because global warming has heated the North Sea, and the sand eels have gone to to find a temperature that they used to. Puffins can only fly, I don't know, it's 10 miles or whatever, and if there's no sand eels there, they die, and the whole colony is wiped out. And that's happening on. When I said there was millions of species going to be wiped out by global warming, that's just an absolute fact, and it's not just the big, iconic species like the polar bear, but there's an awful lot of things that are going to happen here in a completely uncontrolled manner, and won't be like the first. We're only around for what, is it 20 or 50,000 years, Homo sapiens. This is a tiny time on the planet, and all other species of hominids, starting with Lucy, and I visited some tomb systems in South Africa there a couple of weeks ago, and Australopithecus was there 3.3 million years ago, and that was kind of an ape but getting to be a little bit human-like. And they all faded out because of the environment, because of environmental changes. So, we've got to be careful about this environment that we have here. We have no idea. We're only 20,000 years around. That's nothing in historical terms. Absolutely nothing. We're here a far shorter time than Neanderthals, with whom we apparently did some interbreeding. But all the previous species, you're looking at me. Maybe I deserve it. Anyway, so, well, there we are. I hope that answers your question. Did you want to say it? Yeah?
Can I ask one last question, but another economical one, financial one? And we'll keep it on. I'm a financier for large-scale renewable energies worldwide. I'm here because this place is called Ireland. Ireland championed herself as the financial services center in the world. In these two contexts, can you advise us what Ireland can contribute for the renewable energy projects worldwide, like your company? But when Ireland have a number of other principled services that is a champion in the world, like financial services.
Thank you very much for that question. I'm delighted you asked it, because one of the great principles in the 12th five-year plan was that China would float its currency, the renminbi, or yuan, this year. And they're in the process of doing that. And because nobody in the West seems to understand what's going on in China, they think there's all kinds of instability, and you swear the Chinese economy was in retreat or something, when in fact it's growing by 7% a year, far higher than anywhere else except for Ireland. But Ireland has a very thoroughgoing financial services centre, and I say this to my Chinese colleagues here, that if they were looking for a place which is entirely neutral, which comes with no strings attached, which is already a significant world financial services centre, I would hope that the Chinese would look at the International Financial Services Centre here. We have just so many. Is it 2 or 3 trillion is passing through Dublin now at the International Financial Services Centre, and I would hope that our Chinese colleagues could actually begin to think in terms of locating the management of the renminbi out of our services. Now, to the other part, the substantive part of your question about Ireland and wind and technology, etc. Unfortunately, if you want to deploy a lot of wind energy in Ireland, you have to build the supergrid, the European supergrid. You have to link us up profoundly with Britain, with France, and with Germany. And this is why I rail so honestly against what's the lack of a vision that I see. I mean, one thing good about our culture is in the Bible it says, without a vision the people perish. And that's absolutely a fact. And we have no vision in Europe now, with the result that my company Mainstream is pulled completely out of Europe. We can see no way of building any more renewable energy in Europe because you need a supergrid to do it. You need to link up, you need to balance, capture the storm as it approaches the west coast of Ireland, capture it with lots of wind turbines there, both on land and in the sea, and as that tracks across. And the winds, by the way, in the northern hemisphere all flow the one direction, whether it's China or whether it's Ireland. The winds all come from the southwest up to the northeast on account of the uneven heating of the globe and the rotation of the globe, and it pushes the winds up like that. And if you could capture that over its length, you would balance wind largely by itself. And we proposed a supergrid a number of years ago, and we even set up an institution in Europe to try and bring it about. But Ireland is, like Merkel, rooted in the here and now with no sense of vision for the future. And so long as you're there, you can't do carbon-free electricity in Europe. The limit on any one country, which is an island electricity system, that you can get with renewables is about 25%. Now, if you manage a big grid, and you see, you can't compare Ireland with China, because China is actually a subcontinent, and the United States is a subcontinent, as is India. So they can actually build a grid within the country to balance a lot of this stuff. And storage is coming along. Storage is falling in price, by the way, by 22% with every doubling of production. Solar PV is falling by 24%. So you have storage, the price of storage is coming down almost as fast as solar PV. So without those things, then you can't, without storage, without the supergrid, without a vision for the future, you just can't utilise the natural resources that are here. Free power, free variable cost of power, and actually thereafter quite cheap power. So, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps it would be appropriate at this stage to say thank you very much indeed, and thank you for coming. Bye.